The sound of helicopter blades sliced through the crisp autumn sky, carrying with it a moment that should have been filled with love and excitement. For Anna Carter, 6 months pregnant and glowing with anticipation, this ride was supposed to be a dream, a celebration of new life and a future she thought was secure. Sitting beside her husband Richard, she felt a mix of fear and thrill. Heights always made her uneasy, but Richard had convinced her this was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, a memory worth cherishing. She leaned into him, clutching her belly, whispering to their unborn child that everything would be okay. But hidden beneath Richard's charming smile was a darkness Anna could not see. To the world, he was the perfect husband, successful, confident, and attentive. Yet behind closed doors, he was drowning in debt, obsessed with appearances, and consumed by greed. He had made a decision so cold, so unthinkable, that even he tried to justify it in his own mind. If Anna were gone, he would inherit millions from the insurance policy he had secretly taken out on her. As the helicopter soared higher, the pilot cheerfully pointed out the vast forests below, the rivers winding like silver ribbons, and the distant mountains capped with snow. Anna marveled at the beauty, distracted for a brief moment, unaware of the evil sitting right next to her. Richard's hand rested on her shoulder, but not with tenderness. It trembled with anticipation. He was moments away from carrying out the most heinous act of betrayal. "Isn't this amazing?" Anna said, her voice filled with wonder. Richard forced a smile, nodding, but his eyes shifted toward the door handle. The plan had been rehearsed in his mind over and over. One push, one scream, and it would all be over. He convinced himself she would never know what hit her. She would simply vanish into the depths of the forest, and he would walk away the grieving husband with millions in his bank account. Anna turned back to him, catching his gaze. For a brief second, their eyes locked, and she saw something strange, something cold that sent a shiver down her spine. She opened her mouth to speak, but before the words could leave her lips, Richard lunged forward. With one brutal motion, he shoved her toward the open side of the helicopter. The world spun. The roar of the blades drowned her screams. Anna felt the air rip past her face, her body plunging into the void. Her hands reached out desperately, but there was nothing to hold on to. For one terrifying moment, she thought not of herself, but of the tiny heartbeat inside her, the life she carried. And then, darkness. The forest below was waiting, and Anna's nightmare had only just begun. Before the helicopter, before the betrayal, before the terrifying fall that changed her life forever, Anna Carter was known for something far simpler: kindness. At 29 years old, she lived in a small town where everyone recognized her as the gentle elementary school teacher who loved children more than anything. Her students adored her, often running up to hug her in the hallways. Parents admired her patience and dedication, saying she had a gift for making every child feel special. Her life was not glamorous. She didn't own designer clothes or drive a luxury car. Instead, she carried her books in a worn leather bag her late mother had given her, and she walked to school most mornings with a smile despite the long hours. To Anna, happiness was never about wealth. It was about love, family, and the future she dreamed of building. That future seemed to arrive when she met Richard Carter. He was older, confident, and carried himself like a man who knew exactly what he wanted. To Anna, he seemed like security, a safe harbor after years of modest living. He courted her with flowers, fancy dinners, and promises of a beautiful life together. When he asked her to marry him, she believed she was stepping into a fairy tale. Their wedding was small but joyful, with friends and colleagues gathered to celebrate. Anna wore a simple lace dress, glowing with happiness. She whispered vows through tears, convinced that this man was her soulmate. For a time, things seemed perfect. Richard worked in finance, providing a lifestyle Anna had never known. Weekend getaways, a spacious home, and soon the joyous news that she was expecting their first child. Pregnancy made Anna even more radiant. She often stood in front of the mirror, resting her hands on her growing belly, whispering lullabies to the baby she could not wait to meet. She imagined nursery colors, bedtime stories, and the moment she would finally hold her child. To her, motherhood was the dream she had always cherished, and Richard's encouragement, though sometimes strangely distant, seemed to confirm that dream was shared. But beneath the surface, cracks began to appear. Richard grew colder, more distracted, often disappearing late at night with vague excuses about work. Anna tried to ignore the unease gnawing at her heart. She told herself he was stressed, that finances were heavy, that all marriages had struggles. She clung to hope, believing love would carry them through. Still, a shadow lingered. Once, when she mentioned how lucky she felt, Richard gave a laugh that felt hollow, forced. Another time, when she excitedly showed him baby clothes she had bought, his expression darkened as if the sight annoyed him. She pushed these doubts away, unwilling to believe the man she had vowed to love could be anything less than the partner she trusted. Little did Anna know, the fairy tale she thought she was living was nothing more than a mask. Behind his polished smile and tender gestures, Richard was building a secret plan that would shatter her world and leave her clinging to life itself. The man she thought would protect her was preparing to destroy her. The town where Anna lived was not extraordinary at first glance, but to her, it had always felt like home. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved from their porches, children played in yards until the streetlights came on, and the local diner still served coffee in chipped mugs. The rhythm of life was slow, steady, and comforting. For Anna, it was the perfect environment to raise a child, to build memories in a community that valued simple joys. Her days followed a routine that gave her peace. She would wake early, prepare her lesson plans while sipping tea, and walk to school as the morning sun painted the sky. At the schoolhouse, walls covered with colorful drawings and laughter filling the air, Anna found her true purpose. Every smile from a child reminded her why she had chosen this path. Teaching was not just a job. It was her calling. The house she shared with Richard stood at the edge of town, a large two-story home with a wide porch and a neatly trimmed lawn. On the outside, it looked like a picture of success, the kind of home others might envy. But for Anna, its walls had begun to feel colder. In the evenings, she would sit alone at the kitchen table, the sound of the clock echoing in the silence while she waited for Richard to return from his so-called late meetings. When he was home, the atmosphere was complicated. Sometimes Richard was charming, showering her with compliments or surprising her with gifts. Other times, his mood was sharp, distant, as if she were a burden rather than a partner. Anna tried to dismiss these moments, convincing herself it was just stress from work. But deep down, a quiet fear began to take root. Yet to outsiders, the Carters were admired. At community gatherings, Richard played the role of the devoted husband flawlessly. He wrapped his arm around Anna, smiled warmly, and spoke proudly of the baby on the way. No one suspected the shadows lurking beneath his polished exterior. The illusion of their marriage was as convincing as the house itself. Beautiful on the outside, hollow within. When autumn arrived, the town glowed with golden leaves, and the crisp air carried a sense of new beginnings. Anna loved the season, believing it was a sign of hope. She decorated the nursery with soft blankets and pastel colors, humming lullabies as she worked. To her, everything was ready for the child she longed to meet. But Richard had other plans. The town, the school, the home, all of it was part of a stage for his performance. He had already set events in motion, arranging policies, disguising his greed as care. Anna, blissfully unaware, continued to dream of family dinners and bedtime stories, while her husband calculated numbers and dates. The main setting of Anna's life appeared ordinary, even idyllic. But within the quiet streets and warm homes, a tragedy was brewing that would soon erupt in the most shocking way imaginable. The peaceful town would become the witness to a betrayal so dark it would haunt every corner of Anna's life. On the surface, Richard Carter was everything a woman could dream of. Tall, confident, successful, and charming. He carried himself like a man in control, with tailored suits, a commanding voice, and a smile that could disarm anyone. At neighborhood gatherings, he was the first to raise a toast, the man who seemed to adore his wife and eagerly awaited fatherhood. To most people, Richard was the kind of husband women envied. But behind closed doors, when the performance ended, another Richard emerged. He was restless, cold, and calculating. To him, marriage was not a sacred bond, but a transaction. Anna, sweet and trusting, was nothing more than a piece in his larger game. Her pregnancy, which should have been a moment of joy, became in his mind a burden, a chain that threatened to tie him down further. What no one knew was that Richard's financial life was crumbling. Years of reckless investments, secret gambling nights, and failed business ventures had left him drowning in debt. He lived far beyond his means, desperate to maintain the image of wealth and control. Creditors were calling, pressure was mounting, and Richard saw only one escape: money. That was when the idea took root. If Anna were gone, he would inherit a large payout from the life insurance policy he had carefully set up months earlier. It was supposed to be a gesture of protection, a husband safeguarding his wife and unborn child. But in reality, it was a weapon disguised as love. His double life extended beyond finances. Richard had begun an affair with a woman he met during one of his business trips, a woman who fed his ego and whispered promises of freedom. With her, he could escape responsibility, live the life of luxury he craved, and never again be tied down by bills, children, or obligations. To Richard, Anna was not a partner. She was an obstacle. The contrast between Anna's innocence and Richard's corruption was striking. While she knitted baby clothes and wrote lesson plans for her students, Richard scrolled through bank statements, calculating dates, and rehearsing the lie he would tell, that her death had been a tragic accident. He convinced himself the plan was flawless. No one would question a grieving husband. The world would pity him, and with money in hand, he would finally be free. Yet even as he played the role of the doting husband, flashes of his darker nature would slip through. Anna noticed the way his eyes grew distant when she spoke about their child, or the irritation in his voice when she asked about his late nights. She told herself it was stress, but deep down, her heart felt uneasy. Richard's villainy was not a sudden eruption but a slow reveal, like a mask slipping off piece by piece. The charming man who had swept Anna off her feet was gone, replaced by a predator preparing to strike. His betrayal would not only shatter her trust, it would push her into a nightmare she could never have imagined. Richard's mask was cracking, and soon, his darkest plan would come to life. Richard Carter had always been skilled at hiding his true intentions, but the steps he took in the months leading to Anna's fall revealed the depth of his cold calculation. What began as a gesture of love soon became a blueprint for murder. Not long after Anna announced her pregnancy, Richard surprised her with papers he claimed were for their future. He spoke softly, reassuring her that every responsible husband needed to think ahead, that protecting the family financially was a sign of love. Trusting him completely, Anna signed without question. She believed she was safeguarding her child's future, never imagining she was sealing her own fate. The policy was enormous, millions of dollars. Richard had worked every angle, convincing the insurance agent that it was a necessary precaution given their upcoming responsibilities. To the outside world, it seemed admirable, even noble. But for Richard, it was the ticket out of his crumbling life. At night, while Anna slept soundly with her hand resting on her belly, Richard would sit in his study, staring at the numbers. His debts weighed on him like chains, his gambling losses mounting higher with every week. He saw no way to crawl out, unless Anna were gone. That thought, once unthinkable, began to feel like the only solution. He started researching accidents, car crashes, boating mishaps, tragic slips. But each one carried too many risks of suspicion. It had to be clean, shocking, and unquestionable. Then, during a casual business trip with colleagues, someone mentioned helicopter tours over the autumn forests. A light flickered in Richard's mind. It was perfect. An accident in the sky, no way to survive, no evidence left behind. Richard began planting seeds. He suggested to Anna that they take a helicopter ride, framing it as a romantic escape before the baby arrived. "Just the two of us, a memory to tell our child one day," he said, smiling warmly. Anna hesitated at first. She had always been nervous about heights, but his insistence wore her down. She saw it as a chance to reconnect, to remind herself of the man she had fallen in love with. Meanwhile, Richard rehearsed every detail. He studied the layout of the aircraft, the timing of the ride, the exact moment he could push her without the pilot noticing. He convinced himself no one would ever suspect foul play. Who would believe that a husband, soon to be a father, would commit such a monstrous act? Anna, unaware of the trap tightening around her, prepared for the outing with childlike excitement. She picked out a soft dress, packed a small camera to capture the view, and told her friends she was nervous but hopeful. She wanted to believe this was Richard's way of showing he still cared. In truth, Richard's heart was not filled with love. It was filled with greed. He wasn't planning memories. He was planning murder. The insurance money was waiting, and Richard was ready to trade his wife and unborn child for a fortune. The morning of the helicopter ride began with a fragile sense of hope for Anna. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and wood smoke. She stood by the bedroom mirror, smoothing her soft blue dress over her round belly, whispering to her unborn child, "This will be a special day. Daddy wants us to make a memory together." Her words trembled with nervous excitement, but she forced herself to believe them. Richard watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You look beautiful," he said smoothly, the words rolling off his tongue without warmth. Anna blushed, taking it as a compliment, unaware that behind his eyes burned the calculation of a man rehearsing murder. At the airfield, the roar of the helicopter blades greeted them. The machine gleamed in the sunlight, an exciting but intimidating sight. Anna's heart raced as they approached. The pilot, a cheerful man with graying hair, helped her into the cabin, offering a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, ma'am. It's safe. You'll love the view." Richard slid in beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. To the pilot, they looked like the picture of young love. Anna leaned into him, resting her head lightly against his chest. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe this was what she had longed for. A chance to feel close again, to reclaim the tenderness that had faded in recent months. The helicopter lifted off, the ground shrinking away as the sky opened wide before them. Anna gasped at the view. Golden forests stretched for miles, rivers glittered like ribbons of light, and the mountains in the distance looked painted against the horizon. She reached for her camera, snapping a picture with childlike joy. "It's so beautiful," she whispered. Richard nodded, his jaw tight. He pretended to look out the window, but his mind was locked on the plan. The altitude was perfect, the cabin door just a reach away. Every second felt heavy, every heartbeat a drumbeat of opportunity. Anna placed her hand over his. "Thank you for bringing me," she said softly. For a split second, Richard faltered. Her voice, filled with gratitude and trust, almost pierced through the armor of his greed. But then he remembered the debts, the mistress waiting, the millions within his grasp. His face hardened again. The pilot pointed out landmarks below, his voice loud over the headset. Anna leaned forward to see better, her hand instinctively cradling her belly. The moment was perfect, too perfect. Richard's pulse quickened. He knew it had to be now, before hesitation could weaken him, before anyone noticed. Anna turned back to him, her eyes bright with wonder. "Our baby will love hearing about this one day," she said, her lips curving into a smile that carried nothing but love. Richard's fingers twitched near the door handle, his mind screaming that the moment had come. One push, one scream, and his life would be changed forever. Anna had no idea that the dream she thought she was living was seconds away from turning into her worst nightmare. The helicopter hovered gracefully above the forest, its blades slicing the air like the heartbeat of the sky. Inside, Anna Carter was still mesmerized by the breathtaking view. She leaned forward, eyes wide, capturing every detail in her memory. She didn't notice the cold glint in Richard's eyes, nor the way his hand lingered too close to the cabin door. The pilot, focused on flying, chattered over the headset about landmarks below. "See that river? It's shaped like a horseshoe. Locals call it Lucky Bend." His voice was cheerful, oblivious to the storm brewing just behind him. Anna turned to Richard, her face glowing. "Lucky Bend," she repeated, laughing softly. "Maybe it's a sign. Maybe our baby will be lucky." She reached for his hand, her touch warm, innocent, full of trust. Richard froze for a fraction of a second. Her words pierced him, threatening to unravel the wall of greed he had built around himself. For a moment, he almost faltered, but then his mind snapped back to the debts, the mistress, the millions waiting. His jaw tightened. There was no turning back. He leaned closer, his lips brushing her ear as if whispering something tender. "Yes, lucky," he murmured, his voice chillingly calm. Then, with a sudden force, his hand gripped her shoulder. Anna's smile vanished. Her eyes widened in confusion as she felt the violent shove. Time seemed to slow. Her body lurched toward the open side of the helicopter. Wind roared in her ears, the world tilting into chaos. "Richard!" she screamed, her voice raw with terror. Her fingers clawed for something, anything to hold on to. For one desperate second, she caught the edge of the doorframe. Her knuckles turned white as she clung to life, the blades thundering above her. The pilot glanced back, startled by the scream, but Richard moved fast. He pressed his hand down hard on hers, prying her fingers loose one by one. "Let go," he hissed, his eyes cold, unrecognizable. Anna's tears streamed into the rushing wind. "Please, the baby," she begged, her voice breaking. But mercy was no longer part of Richard's heart. With one final push, her grip slipped, and she was gone. The air ripped past her as she plummeted, the forest rushing up to meet her. The scream tore from her throat until it was swallowed by the wind. In that final moment, she wasn't thinking of Richard or the betrayal. She thought only of the child inside her, praying for a miracle, begging God to let at least the baby survive. Above, Richard sat back in his seat, adjusting his expression into one of horror. "Oh my God," he shouted to the pilot, feigning shock. She slipped, his voice cracked convincingly, his performance flawless. The pilot's face went pale, his hands gripping the controls. "We have to report this," he shouted, but Richard only bowed his head, hiding the small, satisfied smirk tugging at his lips. Anna was falling into darkness, but her story was far from over. The world became a blur as Anna tumbled through the open sky. The roar of the helicopter blades faded into the rush of wind tearing past her ears. Her body twisted uncontrollably, the horizon spinning, the forest below rushing closer with terrifying speed. She couldn't breathe, she couldn't think. All she could do was scream. Her hands flailed wildly, reaching for anything, but there was nothing but air. The weight of gravity pulled her down, relentless and merciless. Every second felt like an eternity. The only clear thought that cut through the panic was of her baby. Her hands instinctively clutched her belly as if to shield the fragile life within. "Please," she whispered into the wind, her voice lost in the storm. "Please, let my baby live." The ground rushed closer. Anna braced herself for the end, her eyes squeezed shut. But fate had other plans. Instead of striking the forest floor, her body crashed into the thick branches of a towering pine tree. The impact was brutal, each branch tearing at her skin, her clothes ripping, her body jolting violently. Pain exploded through her, but each branch slowed her descent, breaking her fall little by little. Finally, with a bone-rattling thud, Anna landed in a bed of thick underbrush. The air was knocked from her lungs, leaving her gasping desperately. For a moment, silence surrounded her, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the helicopter fading away. Her body ached from head to toe. Blood trickled down her arms, cuts and bruises covered her skin, and a searing pain tore through her abdomen. Her trembling hands moved instinctively to her belly, dread flooding her veins. She waited, desperate for the faint flutter of life she had grown used to feeling. But there was nothing. Tears blurred her vision as the truth hit her with devastating force. The baby, her baby, was gone. A sob ripped from her throat, raw and primal. The pain in her body was nothing compared to the agony in her heart. The child she had sung to, dreamed of, and longed to hold had been stolen from her in an instant. For long minutes, Anna lay there, broken and bleeding, staring up at the canopy of trees. She wanted to give up, to let the darkness take her. But somewhere deep inside, a flicker of will remained. She was alive. Against all odds, she had survived the fall. If she gave up now, Richard would win. Clutching the earth beneath her fingers, Anna forced herself to breathe. Each inhale was shallow, painful, but it was proof she still existed. She thought of her students, her mother's memory, and the injustice that had just been done. Slowly, through the crushing grief, a single thought burned like fire. She would not let him get away with this. Her body trembled violently, her vision dimming, but her heart clung to that spark of determination. She was not finished. Not yet. Anna had survived the impossible, but the nightmare was only beginning. The forest floor was quiet, almost peaceful. But for Anna Carter, it was a prison of agony. Every breath she took felt like knives stabbing into her ribs. Her arms and legs trembled with weakness, her dress torn, her skin streaked with blood and dirt. The cool earth pressed against her cheek as she lay motionless, trying to gather the strength to move. The silence was unbearable. No voices, no footsteps, no one to hear her cries. Only the rustling of leaves above, and the distant call of a crow echoed through the vast emptiness. For the first time in her life, Anna felt truly abandoned. Her trembling hand rested over her stomach, the hollow space where once life had fluttered with promise. She remembered the first time she had felt her baby kick, the joy that had filled her heart, the way she had laughed and told Richard it was the most beautiful thing she had ever felt. Now there was only stillness, a silence so cruel it shattered her soul. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the dirt and blood. She whispered into the emptiness, "I'm sorry. I couldn't protect you." The words broke her completely. Her child had been her light, her dream, her reason for enduring. Now that dream had been ripped away in the most brutal way possible. The grief nearly swallowed her whole, but instinct refused to let her surrender. Somewhere inside, her spirit screamed that she could not die here, not like this. Not while Richard believed he had won. If she perished now, her child's death would be for nothing. She had to survive. She had to tell the world the truth. With shaking arms, Anna tried to push herself up. Pain exploded through her ribs, forcing her back down with a cry. Her body was weak, broken, but her will pressed forward. Inch by inch, she dragged herself through the dirt, clawing at roots and rocks, desperate to move. Each movement tore at her wounds, but she refused to stop. Her vision blurred, and the forest spun around her. She thought of her students' smiling faces, of the little drawings they had given her with hearts and rainbows. She thought of her late mother, whose soft voice always told her, "Anna, you are stronger than you know." That memory lit a spark in her chest. The day faded into dusk, the shadows of the forest stretching long and cold. Anna's body grew numb, her strength draining fast. She collapsed against the base of a tree, her breathing shallow. She knew she couldn't last much longer without help. But as her eyes fluttered closed, she heard something, a distant sound cutting through the stillness. Voices. Male voices. Someone was near. For the first time since the fall, hope pierced through her despair. Anna's body was broken, her baby gone, but salvation might have been closer than she dared believe. The voices grew clearer, carried by the evening breeze. Anna's heavy eyelids fluttered open, her mind struggling to focus. At first, she thought she was hallucinating, that the whispers of men calling to one another were only the cruel tricks of her fading consciousness. But then the crunch of boots on dry leaves reached her ears, real and undeniable. "Over here!" a voice shouted. Her heart lurched. With what little strength she had left, Anna tried to move her arm, dragging her fingers through the dirt to make a sound. Her throat was too dry to call out, her voice stolen by hours of crying and screaming into the wilderness. She could only hope they would see her before it was too late. Two hikers emerged from the trees, flashlights sweeping through the shadows. The beams caught her pale, battered figure at the base of the tree. One of them gasped, "My God, she's alive!" They rushed to her side, kneeling beside her broken body. Her face was pale, streaked with blood and tears, her clothes torn. Her belly collapsed in a way that made the tragedy clear. One man touched her wrist, searching desperately for a pulse. Relief flooded his voice when he found it, faint but steady. "Call 911, he barked. The other scrambled for his phone, his hands trembling as he dialed. "We found a woman. She fell. She's pregnant, or she was." His voice broke as he looked down at her. Anna's eyelids fluttered weakly. She could see them, but couldn't form words. Only a faint moan escaped her lips. "You're going to be okay," the man beside her whispered, though his own eyes betrayed doubt. He removed his jacket and draped it over her trembling body. "Stay with us. Help is coming." Minutes stretched like hours as they waited. Anna drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by flashes of the fall, Richard's cold eyes, and the baby she had lost. She wanted to scream the truth, to tell them that her husband had done this, but her lips refused to form the words. The sound of sirens finally pierced the stillness of the night. Emergency responders rushed down the forest path, carrying stretchers and equipment. They surrounded her quickly, voices overlapping in urgency. "Multiple fractures, severe blood loss, get her stabilized now." They lifted her carefully onto the stretcher, securing her frail body as she whimpered in pain. The paramedic glanced at the hikers. "You saved her life. Another hour and she wouldn't have made it." As they carried her toward the ambulance, Anna's gaze turned upward, catching a glimpse of the night sky. The stars blurred through her tears. Somewhere in her shattered heart, she felt the presence of the child she had lost, as though the little soul was watching over her. A wave of grief crashed through her, nearly pulling her into darkness again. The ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren wailed as they sped toward the hospital. Anna's life hung by a thread, but she was not gone yet. Richard believed she was dead, but the truth would soon return to haunt him. Back at the resort, Richard Carter played his role to perfection. The moment the helicopter touched down, he staggered out, clutching his head with trembling hands. His voice cracked as he shouted to bystanders, "She fell! My wife! She slipped!" The pilot, still pale and shaken from the scream he'd heard midair, tried to explain the chaos, but Richard drowned him out with theatrical sobs. Crowds gathered quickly, drawn by the commotion. Richard collapsed to his knees, his expensive suit crumpling in the dirt as he cried into his hands. To onlookers, he looked like a man whose world had just shattered. Women covered their mouths in horror. Men shook their heads in disbelief. A few even patted his shoulder, whispering words of comfort. "Stay strong, we're so sorry." But behind the mask of despair, Richard's mind was calm, almost euphoric. He had done it. The plan had worked flawlessly. No one had seen the push. No one suspected foul play. As far as the world knew, Anna's death was nothing more than a tragic accident. Soon, the insurance company would write him a check large enough to erase his debts and fund his new life with his mistress. He rehearsed his next moves in his head. He would call Anna's colleagues, breaking the news with a trembling voice. He would plan a funeral that would showcase his grief, making himself the image of a heartbroken widower. He would stand by her grave, shedding crocodile tears, while silently imagining the luxury cars and vacations waiting for him. The only variable he couldn't control was the pilot. The man's face still carried shock, his eyes narrowing as though replaying what he had seen, or thought he had seen. Richard made a mental note to deal with that later, perhaps with money or intimidation. For now, the key was to stay in character. That night, Richard returned to their grand home, the lights eerily silent without Anna's presence. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, raised it to the empty room, and smirked. "To freedom," he whispered, savoring the burn as the liquor slid down his throat. Across town, news began to spread. Friends wept, colleagues expressed shock, and the small community mourned the loss of the beloved teacher, who had once lit up every classroom. No one suspected the grieving husband sitting in his darkened house, scrolling through his bank apps, already calculating his fortune. But what Richard didn't know was that Anna was not gone. Even as he celebrated in secret, she lay in a hospital bed miles away, machines keeping her alive, doctors fighting for her fragile body. Her survival was the one outcome Richard hadn't prepared for. And when she opened her eyes, the truth about his betrayal would have the power to destroy him completely. Richard believed he was untouchable, but Anna's heartbeat was about to shatter his illusion. The hospital room was a blur of harsh lights and frantic voices. Anna Carter was wheeled in on a stretcher, her body broken, her skin pale and clammy. Doctors and nurses surrounded her, calling out vitals, inserting IV lines, and rushing to stabilize her. The sound of monitors filled the air, beeps that measured her fragile hold on life. "She's lost a lot of blood," a nurse shouted, pressing gauze against one of her wounds. "Internal bleeding possible," the doctor responded sharply. "We need scans now." Anna drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind floating between shadows. She saw flashes of the fall, Richard's eyes as he pushed her, and the crushing pain that followed. Her lips parted weakly, a faint whisper escaping. "My baby." The staff exchanged glances. They had already seen the truth on the ultrasound. The pregnancy was gone. The child she had carried with so much love had not survived the fall. But in that moment, no one could bring themselves to tell her. The weight of that reality would have to wait until she was stronger, if she survived at all. Hours passed in a blur of surgery, transfusions, and relentless effort. The doctors fought for her life, repairing torn tissue, setting broken bones, monitoring her fragile heart. Her body had endured what should have been unsurvivable, yet somehow she clung to life with a stubbornness that amazed even the most seasoned surgeons. Finally, she was moved to intensive care. Machines hummed softly around her, keeping her stable. A nurse sat by her side, gently brushing the dirt from her hair, whispering, "You're safe now. You made it." But Anna didn't feel safe. Even in her unconscious state, her dreams were haunted. She saw Richard's face hovering above her, not with love, but with the cold calculation of a man who wanted her gone. She saw herself reaching for him, begging, only to feel his hand pry hers away. She heard his voice, cruel and sharp, telling her to let go. She woke suddenly, gasping for air, her eyes flying open in terror. The nurse jumped, leaning over quickly. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're in the hospital. You're alive." Tears welled in Anna's eyes as the reality crashed down. She moved her trembling hand to her stomach, already knowing the answer but desperate for reassurance. "The baby?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The nurse froze, her eyes softening with sorrow. She couldn't bring herself to speak the truth. Instead, she squeezed Anna's hand. "Rest now. You need your strength." The silence was answer enough. Anna's cry was soft but piercing, a sound of heartbreak so raw it filled the sterile room with grief. Her baby was gone. The life she had dreamed of, the future she had longed for, had been stolen. But as despair threatened to consume her, another truth burned even brighter in her heart. Richard had done this, and if she survived, she would make sure the world knew. Anna had lost her child, but she had not lost her will to fight. News of Anna Carter's accident spread quickly through the small town. Teachers whispered about the tragedy, parents wept, and students left flowers and drawings at the school gate. To everyone, it was a heartbreaking story. A beloved teacher and expectant mother lost too soon. Everyone, except Michael Stone. Michael was a former police officer who had known Anna since childhood. He remembered her as the girl who carried too many books in her arms, always smiling despite the weight. Though life had taken them on different paths, he had always admired her kindness and quiet strength. When he heard the news of her fall, something inside him stirred. It didn't sit right. Accidents happened, yes, but Anna was careful to a fault. She hated heights. Why would she ever step into a helicopter willingly? Driven by instinct, Michael made his way to the hospital where Anna lay in intensive care. He wasn't family, but his badge, though retired, still carried weight. After explaining his connection, the nurses allowed him a few minutes. When he stepped into her room, the sight broke him. Anna lay pale and fragile, wires and tubes surrounding her, her chest rising slowly with each assisted breath. Her face was bruised, her hands bandaged, her once bright eyes dull with exhaustion. Yet even in her brokenness, there was fire in her gaze when she saw him. "Michael," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He moved closer, gently squeezing her hand. "I'm here, Anna. You're safe now." Tears welled in her eyes. "No, I'm not safe. He tried to kill me." The words hit Michael like a hammer. He leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Who?" Her lips trembled, but she forced the name out. "Richard." Michael's stomach sank. He had always distrusted Richard Carter. Too polished, too smooth, the kind of man who cared more about appearances than people. But to hear this, to hear that Richard had shoved his pregnant wife from a helicopter, rage simmered beneath Michael's calm exterior. He lowered his voice, steady but firm. "Anna, I believe you, but you need to rest. Let me handle this. I'll find proof." For the first time since the fall, a spark of hope flickered in Anna's eyes. She gripped his hand weakly. "Don't let him win." Michael nodded, his heart heavy with determination. He had seen many tragedies in his years on the force, but this one was personal. He couldn't walk away. Richard might have fooled the world with his crocodile tears, but Michael knew a predator when he saw one. As he left the hospital room, Michael's mind was already turning. He would talk to the pilot, review the flight records, check the insurance policy. Somewhere, Richard had slipped, and Michael would find the crack in his armor. Outside, the night was cold, the town blanketed in quiet sorrow. But Michael's resolve burned hot. Anna had survived the impossible, and now it was his mission to make sure Richard faced the consequences. Richard thought the truth was buried, but Michael Stone was about to dig it up. Michael Stone had learned long ago that evil often hid behind polished smiles. Richard Carter was no different. On the surface, he played the role of a devastated husband, but Michael had seen enough liars in interrogation rooms to recognize the signs. And Anna's words, whispered through cracked lips in that hospital bed, echoed in his mind. "He tried to kill me." The next morning, Michael drove to the airfield. The pilot who had flown the Carters was still there, filling out paperwork, his face pale and lined with unease. Michael introduced himself, flashing the badge he still carried though retired. "I need to ask about the flight," he said firmly. The pilot hesitated, then sighed. "I keep telling myself it was an accident, but something felt wrong. The scream, her scream, it wasn't like she slipped. It was terror, pure terror. And the husband." His voice trailed off, eyes narrowing. He didn't look surprised, he looked prepared. That was all Michael needed to hear. It wasn't proof yet, but it was a thread. His next stop was the insurance office downtown. With a few calls to old contacts in law enforcement, he managed to gain access to Richard's files. What he found made his stomach turn. A massive life insurance policy taken out on Anna just months before the accident. The payout? Millions. Michael leaned back in his chair, anger tightening his chest. It was too perfect. Richard had dressed it up as responsibility, but to Michael it screamed motive. He dug deeper. Bank statements revealed mounting debts, credit card bills unpaid, gambling losses tucked under vague business transactions. Richard was drowning financially. The insurance policy wasn't security. It was salvation. Michael closed the folder, his jaw set. He knew the pattern all too well. A desperate man, cornered by his own greed, willing to sacrifice anyone to save himself. Only this time, that man had targeted someone Michael cared about. But Richard wasn't just careless with money. He was careless with loyalty. Michael discovered that Richard had been seen frequently at upscale restaurants with a younger woman. Waiters and bartenders described the two as affectionate, even intimate. The mistress was another piece of the puzzle, another reason Richard wanted Anna gone. He wasn't planning a future with her. He was planning a future without her. By evening, Michael had enough to confirm his suspicions, but not enough to bring Richard down in court. He needed solid evidence, something undeniable. Still, the walls were closing in. Driving back to the hospital, Michael rehearsed how he would tell Anna. She deserved to know that her instincts had been right, that she wasn't crazy, that Richard's betrayal was as real as the scars on her body. But he also knew the truth would shatter her heart all over again. As he parked outside the hospital, his phone buzzed. A text message lit up the screen, the sender unknown. "Stop digging into Richard Carter if you value your life." Michael's eyes hardened. The game had just turned deadly, and Michael realized Richard wasn't the only one watching him. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in Anna Carter's hospital room. Her body was weak, stitched together by doctors' hands, but her spirit refused to fade. Days had passed since the fall, yet every time she closed her eyes, she saw Richard's face, the cold stare, the force of his shove, the moment her world shattered. When the door opened softly, Anna expected another nurse. Instead, Michael Stone stepped inside, his familiar figure bringing a sense of safety she hadn't felt in weeks. He pulled up a chair, his expression serious. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Anna's lips trembled. Alive, but not whole. Her hand moved to her stomach, tears brimming in her eyes. "My baby, gone." Michael's jaw tightened, his heart breaking for her. He reached for her hand. "I'm so sorry, Anna, but you're still here, and that means you still have a chance to fight." She looked at him, confusion flickering. "Fight? What do you mean?" Michael hesitated for a moment, then leaned closer. "I've been digging. Richard isn't who you think he is. The insurance policy, the debts, the mistress. Anna, he pushed you. He planned this." Anna's breath caught. She turned her face away, as though denying it would make it untrue. But deep down she had always known. The strange looks, the cold words, the way his touch had felt like a weight rather than love, it all came crashing back. Her tears spilled freely. "I loved him, Michael. I gave him everything, and he killed our baby." Her voice cracked, raw with grief and fury. Michael's grip tightened on her hand. "You're not crazy. You're not imagining things. I spoke to the pilot. He said your scream wasn't like an accident. And I found the insurance papers. Millions, Anna. He was going to collect it all after your death." Anna shook her head, her sobs shaking her fragile body. "How could he? How could the man I trusted with my life, with my child, do this to me?" Michael didn't answer. There were no words strong enough to soften such a truth. Instead, he let her cry, her pain filling the sterile room like a storm. When she finally looked back at him, her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes burned with something new: anger. He thinks he won. He thinks I'm gone. But I'm not. He took my child, but he won't take my voice. Michael nodded, pride swelling in his chest. Then we'll get him. But we have to be smart. He's already dangerous, Anna. He won't stop just because you survived. Anna's voice dropped to a whisper, but her words carried the weight of a vow. Then I won't stop either. I'll make him pay. Anna's grief had turned into fire, and Richard was about to face a reckoning he never saw coming. Richard Carter believed his nightmare was over. In his mind, Anna had vanished into the forest, her screams silenced forever. He had already begun to rehearse his speech for the funeral, even picturing the sympathetic nods of neighbors as he stood stoically by her grave. But when whispers reached him that Anna was still alive, his entire facade began to crack. He first heard it through a careless comment at the resort. A staff member mentioned that search teams had found someone in the forest, gravely injured but alive. Richard's face paled, though he forced a smile and nodded as if the news brought relief. Inside, panic roared. If Anna lived, everything was at risk. The insurance payout, his mistress, his freedom. That night, he sat in his darkened study, his hands trembling as he poured another drink. She should be dead, he muttered, slamming the glass onto the table. Every plan he had so carefully laid out was unraveling. He knew Anna. If she had breath in her body, she would tell someone what really happened, and if she told, the world would believe her. There was only one solution left. He would have to finish what he started. 2 nights later, Richard slipped into the hospital, disguised in dark clothes and a baseball cap. He moved with confidence, waving casually at the night staff, pretending to be just another worried visitor. Years of charm had taught him how to blend in, how to wear the perfect mask. Anna lay in her room, dozing lightly under the soft glow of the monitors. Her face was pale, her body fragile, but her spirit remained unbroken. Michael had been with her earlier, but he had left briefly to make calls, promising to return soon. She was alone now, vulnerable. Richard pushed the door open, his heart pounding. For a moment he simply stared at her, the woman he had vowed to love, the woman he had betrayed in the most monstrous way. Instead of guilt, a surge of hatred filled him. She was the one obstacle standing between him and his new life. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her bed. Anna stirred, her eyes fluttering open. At first, she thought it was Michael, but when her gaze focused, her blood ran cold. Richard. Her lips parted in horror. "Surprised to see me?" he whispered, his voice dripping with venom. Anna's heart raced, her hand instinctively reaching for the call button. Richard lunged forward, gripping her wrist tightly. "Don't even think about it," he hissed. Her voice trembled. "Why, Richard? Why wasn't destroying my life enough?" He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "Because you're still breathing, and as long as you breathe, you can ruin everything." Anna struggled weakly, fear coursing through her veins, but her eyes blazed with defiance. "You'll never get away with this." Before Richard could act, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the hall, and the door handle began to turn. The door creaked open just as Richard tightened his grip on Anna's wrist. His eyes flashed with panic, but his mask snapped back into place within seconds. He turned, ready to spin another lie, but froze when he saw who had entered. Michael Stone. The former cop stepped inside, his sharp gaze immediately locking onto the scene before him. He saw the fear in Anna's eyes, the bruising grip of Richard's hand on her arm, and the predator crouched beside her bed. In an instant, Michael understood. "Get away from her," Michael growled, his voice low, steady, and dangerous. Richard smirked, trying to recover. "Michael, you've misunderstood. I was just checking on my wife. She's been through a lot." Michael's eyes narrowed. "She's not your wife anymore. Not after what you did." Anna's voice cracked as she found her strength. "Michael, he was going to kill me again." The words pierced the air like a knife. Richard's smirk faltered, his polished facade crumbling. He lunged forward suddenly, his free hand reaching for the call button to silence Anna forever. But Michael was faster. In one swift motion, he grabbed Richard by the collar and yanked him away from the bed, slamming him against the wall. "You lay another finger on her, and I swear you won't walk out of here," Michael spat, his fist pressing hard into Richard's chest. Richard sneered, trying to twist free. "You think anyone will believe her? She's broken. She's weak. It'll be my word against hers." Michael's grip tightened. No, it'll be your word against mine, and I've already started collecting evidence. Richard's eyes flickered with unease. For the first time, he realized the walls were closing in. His debts, his mistress, his lies. Michael was unraveling them all. Anna, trembling but determined, lifted her voice. I remember everything, Richard. I remember you pushing me. I remember you prying my fingers off that helicopter. You killed our baby. Her voice cracked, filled with both grief and fury. For a moment, the room was heavy with silence. Richard's expression twisted, caught between rage and fear. Then, with a sudden burst of desperation, he shoved Michael back and bolted for the door. Stop him! Anna cried, her heart pounding. Michael lunged after him, but Richard was already sprinting down the hospital corridor. Nurses gasped, startled by the chaos. Michael chased, his footsteps echoing, his voice booming. Security! Don't let him leave! Richard darted around the corner, shoving past startled staff. His mind raced. He needed to escape, to vanish, before the truth consumed him. But Michael was relentless, years of training propelling him forward. As Richard pushed through the exit doors, alarms blared. Security guards rushed toward the commotion, blocking his path. He skidded to a halt, trapped between the guards in front and Michael closing in from behind. For the first time, Richard's confident mask shattered completely. Cornered in the hospital parking lot, Richard realized his carefully built world was crumbling faster than he could run. The hospital parking lot swarmed with flashing lights and raised voices. Security guards held Richard by both arms, his suit rumpled, his face twisted with desperation. Michael stood nearby, chest heaving, his eyes locked on the man who had almost gotten away with murder. But the real moment of reckoning belonged to Anna. Word spread quickly. Reporters arrived, tipped off by whispers that the beloved teacher who had fallen from a helicopter was still alive, and that her husband had been caught sneaking into the hospital under suspicious circumstances. Cameras clicked, microphones extended, and the world began to watch. Anna insisted on being wheeled outside, despite the doctor's protests. Her body was frail, her wounds still fresh, but her spirit demanded to be heard. Wrapped in a hospital blanket, her face pale yet resolute, she faced Richard for the first time in the open. The crowd fell silent as her voice broke through the night. "Richard Carter," she said, each word trembling but strong. "You tried to kill me. You stole my child from me, and you stood in front of everyone pretending to grieve, while all you ever wanted was money." Gasps rippled through the bystanders. Reporters leaned forward, eager to capture every word. Richard's face flushed red. "She's lying," he shouted, his voice cracking. "She's traumatized, confused. She doesn't know what she's saying." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but they burned with fury. "I know exactly what I'm saying. You pushed me from that helicopter. I begged you to think of our baby, and you ripped my fingers away. You killed our child with your own hands." Her voice rose, sharp and unrelenting. "And all for what? For money, for greed, for another woman." The crowd erupted with murmurs. Some cursed under their breath, others shook their heads in disgust. The illusion of the devoted husband shattered before their eyes. Michael stepped forward, holding up a folder. "We have evidence. The insurance policy worth millions, signed just months before the accident. His debts, his mistress, and the testimony of the pilot who heard her scream. This wasn't an accident. This was attempted murder." The cameras captured every angle. Richard squirming, Anna trembling yet fierce, Michael presenting the proof. The truth could no longer be buried. Richard's mask slipped completely. His voice grew frantic, almost hysterical. "You don't understand. I had no choice. I was drowning. She never would have understood. I deserved a fresh start." The words only sealed his fate. The crowd recoiled, horrified by his selfishness. Anna stared at him, her tears streaming freely. "You didn't deserve me. You didn't deserve our child. And now you will pay for what you've done." The security guards tightened their grip as police officers arrived to take custody. Richard thrashed, screaming protests, but his words were drowned out by the jeers of the onlookers. For the first time, the predator stood exposed, his lies torn apart in front of the world. As the police dragged him away in handcuffs, Anna knew the fight was not over. Justice had only just begun. The courthouse was packed on the day of Richard Carter's trial. Reporters crowded the steps, their cameras flashing as police escorted him inside in chains. Gone was the polished man in tailored suits who once charmed the town. Now he appeared disheveled, hollow-eyed, his arrogance replaced with the desperation of a man cornered. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Teachers, parents, and townsfolk who had once admired Anna sat together, united by outrage. They had mourned her, grieved for her supposed death, and now they came to see justice served for the betrayal that had shocked them all. Anna sat near the front, her body still weak but her spirit unshaken. Michael remained by her side, his presence steady as a rock. She wore a simple dress, her face pale yet radiant with quiet strength. Though her hands trembled, her eyes never left Richard. This was the man who had once promised her forever, who had instead pushed her into darkness. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out the evidence. The massive insurance policy signed just months before the fall, Richard's crushing debts, his affair with another woman, and the pilot's testimony about Anna's terrified scream. Each piece of the puzzle painted Richard not as a grieving husband, but as a predator driven by greed. When Anna took the stand, the room fell silent. Her voice was soft at first, but it carried the weight of truth. She described the helicopter ride, the moment she realized Richard's plan, the horror of feeling his hand pry her fingers loose, and the agony of losing her baby. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and even hardened jurors looked shaken. "I trusted him," she said, her voice breaking. "I loved him with all my heart, and he threw me away, for money. He killed our child and nearly killed me. That is not a husband. That is a monster." Richard's defense scrambled to paint the incident as a tragic accident, claiming Anna's trauma clouded her memory. But their arguments collapsed under the mountain of evidence. Richard's own words, caught in recordings and overheard by investigators, revealed his obsession with money and freedom from responsibility. His mistress testified reluctantly, admitting he had spoken about a new life without baggage. After days of testimony, the jury deliberated only a few hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady. Guilty on all charges. The sentence was swift and severe. Richard Carter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel struck, sealing his fate. Gasps and murmurs filled the room, but Anna sat still, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. It was not joy she felt, but a heavy release. Justice had been served, yet nothing could bring back the child she had lost. As Richard was led away in handcuffs, he turned once more toward Anna, his eyes filled with bitterness. But she did not flinch. For the first time, she held the power, and he was nothing but a broken man, stripped of his lies. Justice had been delivered, but Anna's journey was not over. Her heart longed for healing, and fate was about to surprise her. Months passed after Richard Carter's sentencing, and the small town that once buzzed with gossip now spoke of Anna Carter with reverence. She was no longer seen as the fragile teacher who had suffered tragedy, but as the woman who had survived the impossible, stood in court against her husband, and reclaimed her dignity. Yet inside, Anna still carried scars, some visible, others buried deep in her soul. The loss of her child weighed heavily on her. There were nights when she woke up sobbing, clutching her stomach, remembering the soft kicks that would never come again. But with Michael's constant support, she began to rebuild her life piece by piece. Slowly, she returned to the classroom. Her students welcomed her with handmade cards and flowers, their innocent love giving her strength to face each day. It was at a charity event, months later, that Anna's path crossed with Jonathan Hayes, a billionaire philanthropist known for his generosity and quiet humility. Unlike Richard, Jonathan carried no mask. He was kind, grounded, and deeply moved by Anna's story. Where others saw her as a victim, he saw her resilience, her courage, her unbreakable will to survive. At first, Anna was hesitant. Her heart was wary of love, scarred by betrayal. But Jonathan was patient. He never rushed her, never demanded more than she could give. Instead, he walked beside her, offering companionship, respect, and understanding. With him, there were no lies, no hidden agendas, only genuine care. One evening, as they strolled through a garden lit by lanterns, Jonathan paused, his voice tender. "Hannah, I know you've been through more pain than anyone deserves, but I also see your strength, your grace. You deserve joy again. You deserve a family, if that's what your heart still wants." Tears filled her eyes. For so long, she had thought that part of her life was over. Yet with Jonathan, hope flickered again. Months later, when she discovered she was pregnant, her heart swelled with both fear and joy. This time, she was not alone. This time, she had a partner who cherished her, who would stand by her side through every storm. When Anna cradled her newborn daughter for the first time, the weight of her past did not disappear, but it softened. She whispered softly, "You're my miracle." Proof that even after the darkest night, the sun can rise again. The town celebrated with her, inspired by her journey. Students who once mourned her loss now visited to see her smile again, to meet the baby who symbolized hope. And though Richard languished in prison, forgotten and powerless, Anna thrived in a new life built not on lies but on love. Her story became more than just tragedy. It became a testament to resilience, to the power of truth, and to the belief that no betrayal, no matter how cruel, could extinguish the strength of a woman determined to rise. Anna Carter had lost everything once, but now, with love, justice, and a new life in her arms, she had gained far more than Richard could ever steal. So that's how the story closes, my dear friends. If you're still here with me right now, it means this journey touched your heart in some way. And maybe, just maybe, Anna's story is also a mirror for our own lives. The Stoics once said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Anna's pain was unimaginable, but her courage reminds us that healing begins the moment we choose not to let betrayal define us. Another Stoic wisdom goes, "What stands in the way becomes the way." Her fall, her loss, her fight, they became the very path that led her to a new life, a love built on truth. So if you're listening, let this be your reminder. No darkness lasts forever, and no betrayal can bury your worth. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Together, we'll keep telling stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of our own strength.